when we had this really wonderful tour through the world of the technological possibilities and the world of sensors now, I'm looking forward to Peter Purgathofer, who wants to connect his machine. Also, from a different point of view, from the point of view of design in the production and the design process probably that needs to be done into the production. Peter Purgathofer is Associate Professor at the Vienna University of Technology Faculty of Informatics at the Institute of Design and Assessment of Technology, Human-Computer Interaction Group. Since August 2006, he is Austrian representative to the IFIP TC14 at the Technical Committee of Entertainment Computing. And since 2007, Peter is the coordinator for the Media Informatics Bachelor and Master Curricula at Vienna University of Technology. Peter majored in informatics in Vienna and has since focused on the issue of design within informatics. In the course of his work, he founded and led the UID Lab, a cooperation with GB design partners, where he worked on numerous national and international design projects between 1996 and 2004. And among the clients were the Ars Electronica Center here, the City Laboratory for Software Research, and the German Sparkassen Informatikzentrum. Sorry? That's biggie. UID Lab has spun off a design enterprise and is now part of GB Design Partners. And the word design is used very often in your CV. So please welcome Peter, and we will hear about his experience.
Thank you, Bas. Thank you also very much for the invitation. I enjoy very much being here, and thank you to all of you for staying so long. It's always a challenge to be the last speaker in the last panel. Joe, did anybody ever tell you that it's very hard to be a speaker after you? It's not. So I work here, and more specifically here, you see we're a bit playful. This is my main teaching. I do interface and interaction design, and interaction design in the sense where it goes down to the very center of what software should be or what systems should be before they get implemented, so that we think about what it should feel like and what it should be experienced like. So I have a personal page which looks like that, and these are my coordinates, and this is my usual image I have in various systems. So I want to talk about interacting with musical instruments. I played the piano for a couple of years when I was a kid, like 10 years or so. So that's most of my experience. And on the other hand, I'm an interaction designer. So what I'm going to tell you today, what I'm going to talk to you about today is mostly taken from these experiences and from my research background, and also from the brief I got, that it's about one-handed musical instruments, that it's about an instrument that is built for performance and not for production, which are two different spaces in electronic music, and that it's an instrument where you can get virtuous on, you can get very good on, and that it's about an instrument you can control and not about heuristics or random sounds made. There are three sources I built this on, and I want to share them. I'm going to share the slides on SlideShare afterwards, and all the links will be in there. So there's a diploma thesis written by Jörg Pieringer, who is maybe known to one or the other here. He's an artist from Vienna, and he wrote about electronic music and interactivity, principal concepts and applications. It's in German language, unfortunately, but there's a lot of the history of musical instruments in there. The number of the controllers you were talking about are described in there. So, and there's a bachelor thesis written by a student of mine, again in German language. I'm sorry, it's music production with multi-touch interfaces. It's available online too. And what he did was make a workshop with electronic and traditional musicians to find out the qualities, what the interfaces to instruments should look like. It's a bit like, you know, this story where Henry Ford said if I had asked people what they want, they would have said faster horses. So it's a bit like that. It's the faster horses paper, but it's about what musicians want from the controllers. So that's, yeah. And the third thing is something that I found. It's on Aurelianet. It's from a report from a workshop designing musical instruments for flow that I found quite interesting, and there's a lot of the information is from there. So you can go there and read all that for yourself, and then you can go home now if you're tired already. So let's start with the piano. The piano is an instrument, and you can play it in an awful lot of ways. You can play it as a child, you can play the toy piano, you can play it like Horowitz or Glenn Gould, you can put nails and screws into it, or you can destroy it. You can play it in very, very different ways, but one of the things is you can keep learning and learning and learning. If you ever heard Horowitz play in his later years, it was absolutely amazing, and he was so much better than in his young, very tense years, for example. So one of the questions about a musical instrument for me is, how good can you become? Is there something that you can learn after playing 1 day or 2 days or 3 weeks or 10 years? Can you still get better after playing it 10 years? And that's a central property of interfaces to music making. If you can't get better after 10 years, then you probably will not play it in 10 years. Do I want to keep learning for 10 years? Is there the incentive in the instruments that keeps me learning and learning, that keeps me nudging on, where I feel that I get better after 9 years and into the 10th year? So only then I will keep playing it for 10 years or longer. And the other thing is that, how good do you want to become? I mean, the examples you brought were really brilliant, but most of them are gone and nobody's playing them anymore. So you wouldn't want to get good on the, sackbut. What? That's probably the music instrument with the stupidest name in history. So, yes. And so I changed the images a little bit, because a lot of the things came and went and nobody wants to play them anymore. They are a novelty. Will it be there in 6 months? Will it be there in 2 years? Will the instrument be there in 10 years when I have really mastered it? Probably. You know, this theory of 10,000 hours. You need 10,000 hours of doing something, of learning until you get mastery. Will it be respected? If I come with that flute into the orchestra, will the other players in the instrument say, you have something to contribute, or will they laugh at me? I think these are very important parts of what an instrument should be like if it will be played in an orchestra, if it should enable me to become very good and perform with an orchestra. Will you want to play the instrument in 10 years? So I have collected some aspects of interaction design. Some of them were touched already in the talks before me. One is the simplicity and depth. So traditional musical instruments are really simple. When you think about it, if you send a little kid to the piano, it can make a sound with it. It can't play like anybody who's learned it, but it can immediately grasp how the piano works. So as opposed to having a lot of functions packed into something like the piano, it's a very simple interface. The complexity of the piano, of playing virtuously the piano, comes not from the complexity of the system that you play with. It comes from the simplicity, and it comes from the depth that's inside. So if you want to make an electronic instrument that has these qualities, it has to capture a wide range of input data, but support only one particular activity. This is what the musician said in this workshop. And I like this quote very much. As opposed to having, the physical form of a traditional instrument embodies its function. So you see a violin and you know how it sounds because the body makes the sound. It comes from the body. And it's easy to overlook the efficient power of physical embodiment. So currently the goal of many electroacoustic instruments is the production of a range of selected sounds, and I have a theory that many of the things that you showed are actually auteur instruments. It's like in the early terms of the movie, you had auteurs that brought film production a long way. We learned a lot, but being the person who builds it and plays it is not a very sustainable model for most people. So you want simplicity and you want depth. You want rich, satisfying feedback. This is again what the musicians said. It should feel good. If you play a violin, you not only hear what you're playing and you not only see your fingers, you feel the violin in your body. And this is a very important point. Like Beethoven, he went deaf in his old age, but he was still feeling the piano and knowing what was being played by having his hand on the piano. You can feel instruments that have these depths. There's actually an interesting bridge here towards games. There's a classical study where they have these controllers for racing games, and they had a controller that gave rich feedback, like you said Ars meter in German, Popometer, you say what you feel in the seat you're in the car, and the force feedback on the steering wheel and stuff like that. They built one that gave rich feedback, and then they had people compete each other with the rich feedback controller and one that gave no feedback, which was just like the traditional controller for a race car game. And the person who had the rich feedback always outperformed the other one, because this is how we work as human beings, that we take all that feedback and make it into one stream of perception and work on it much better. There's another classic study with the TV and the stereo sound. So they have two sets of TVs. They had an identical image, but one had stereo sound and the other one had mono sound. And they had a comparative study and asked which has the better image. Well, both had the same image, but people said that the one with the stereo sound had the better image. And there is a number of studies I could point to that show that the way we use our perceptions to do what we do is not in channels, but holistic. And the more feedback we get, the better we can do stuff. So I think, and this is a hardy for electronic controllers, if you can make them so they can give immediate and meaningful but physical feedback of what you're playing. That's an interesting challenge. Also, there's an aesthetic of feedback. I'm saying this because I'm going to talk about aesthetics in like 5 minutes. There is feedback that is good for us, that we like. Well, let's just hold on to that. So then we have, this is a small one. Additionally to the use aspect, where you play the instrument, you have the non-use and the misuse aspects. The non-use is stuff like packing it up and transporting it and setting it up. And actually, in practice, musicians that use electronic instruments complain a lot about these because they don't work. They get their instruments on stage, they connect everything and it doesn't work, or there's a hum in it somewhere. This is again, one of the things that are traditionally overlooked when electronic instruments are being built and used on stage. Nobody will use it if it puts you in a situation that is embarrassing for you. You're on stage, you're the performer with these exotic instruments, and there's just a hum coming out instead of what you want to play. If setup is troublesome, potentially embarrassing for the musician, the instrument will not be used. Reliability is a core quality. Instruments, traditional instruments, all have their kinks and quirks. If you have an harmonica, you have to bring it to the performance space an hour before, because for some reasons it needs a phase of acclimatization to this space. But that's okay because it's foreseeable and it's consistent and not erratic and stochastic, such as technology failures typically are. So that's even smaller, because the instrument that is to be built in this context is about determinism, it's about control. Traditional instruments are all about control, but with electronic instruments you have this huge space where you can build heuristics and automation into the instrument. Like the Tenorion, which I like very much, is an instrument in the space between determinism and automation. You do a lot of automation yourself there, but then it goes on and on and on. With electronic instruments, it's very often about this giving up control, but in a way as it was planned by the person building the instrument. So when you see somebody like Thomas Grill, I don't know if you know him, he's a musician from Austria, he builds his own instruments and he goes on stage with them. And like there's one with a spatula that has some kind of pickup, and he pulls it over different surfaces, and it makes incredible sounds. It's really beautiful, but only he's the one who's playing it, because the level of loss of control you have over what it does comes from his own designs, and so only he knows how to play it. So that's this auteur theory I have. So development is today very much a part of the depth of an instrument. It's not hard to learn how to play, but to get control, you need to be the one who built it, and who builds it, and who continues to build it. And then, and this is very important and often overseen, is the aesthetics. So you want to have something that's aesthetic to hold, that's aesthetic to look at, that's aesthetic to play, and that's aesthetic to be observed while you play it. This can't be said too often. But aesthetics is a very broad concept. Traditionally, it's mostly associated with visual aspects, but there's an interactive dimension to it, and it's been described only recently. There's an aesthetics of interaction, and I want to very quickly cover one facet of it. So aesthetics refers to sensual or sensory experience and the kind of taste judgments that concern how something feels. Aesthetic experience is an essential part of everyday life, and we judge all kinds of situations and artifacts aesthetically as well as instrumentally. And then Jonas Löfgren, in a paper that, once again, I'm going to link and you should read it, describe a couple of dimensions of interaction aesthetics: pliability, rhythm, dramaturgical structure, fluency. I always like to put control there, but because I think that the level of control that a nerd wants over his computer, or the experience of control that he wants, is very different from the experience of control that 99.9% of non-nerds in the world want over their computer. And this is an aesthetic quality. Even if nerds always put aesthetic far away from them, it's really an aesthetic quality. It's an aesthetic experience of control. Very briefly into the pliability. Pliability, if you're from Austria, you might remember something like that. This was the map service from the city of Vienna. And when you wanted to go into that map, a new map had to be rendered at the server and sent to you. And this took like 30 seconds or something. Also, if you look at the controls here, you can see that this was not a very interactive or very tight-looped interaction happening here. And then came Google Maps, and Google Maps has just so much more pliability, Geschmeidigkeit, we would say in German. The interaction is very different. You can feel the tight control loop you have over what's going on. And have you ever used Google Maps on something like an iPhone? It's so much more better because you have so much more control. These tight control loops work with the touchscreen much better. Or Google Earth, which is another step down in the pliability. The amount of control, of interactive control you have is just staggering. I don't know about you, I can spend hours with Google Earth just because it's so fun to play around with. And of course, Google Earth on the iPad is just brilliant. And then you find, like a couple of years ago, that Jeff Hahn has actually shown that, and this is more or less what Google Earth on the iPad is now. It's not quite that fast in normal data connection situations. But this is, if you compare that with the original map of Vienna interaction, so this is pliability. You have this tight control loop, and the more it feels like a tight control loop, the more you could say the interaction is pliable. And this is something we can enjoy, this is something we can like, and thus it's an aesthetic quality. So I can only point you to the of shaping a malleable material in a tight loop. This is something that immediately reminds me of musical instruments. So you want to build something that is very pliable. So I can only point you to the paper by Jonas Löfgren and say, read that stuff and try to understand what these qualities are and whether they are of relevance to the things you want to build. Because the point here is, and this is like goes towards the end of my talk, that when you have a system that offers you pliable interaction, you get into that flow. You know that flow? This is by this Hungarian guy with a name nobody knows how to actually say. Csikszentmihalyi, I don't know. So there's this, your skills, what you can do, and the challenge of the interaction, and in between there's this flow channel, so you should be somewhere up here. You're completely immersed in what you're doing, your concentration is very high, you know what you have to do moment by moment, you have very quick and precise feedback as to how well you are doing, your abilities are stretched out but not overwhelmed, all that stuff. It's actually how we feel when we play a musical instrument and can play it good. Now there's an interesting thing. If you look at what games do to keep you playing, it's more or less exactly the same. They have this curve, it's very difficult, and then you have some boss fight or something, and then it's becoming easier, and then it's getting more difficult again. And this curve, this is maybe some larger boss here, that's a small one over there. So you're between these two parts where you don't want to be. It's too difficult, I'm going to fail. There's angst and anxiousness, and there's boredom on the other side, because this is where you don't want your game to end, being the same all again. You get better and better, and it doesn't get harder. So it has to get harder while you get better. So in one, you could say, okay, this is flow. There's flow written in there. This is, obviously my computer and the Beamer don't agree upon the grayscale. But at the same time, this is not only the skill I have, this is also the time. So this is what games do over time, and this is what keeps us going. My son has been playing some Pokemon game now for 9 months. It's incredible, the number of things he knows about Pokemon. The amount of stuff he can tell you about this universe, it's incredible, because he's been learning and learning and learning. So this is actually where learning happens. Now you can do it wrong, like EVE Online obviously did. This is somebody drawing the learning curve of EVE Online. But the question is, so EVE Online is too complex, obviously. So the question is where I already answered that. Are traditional musical instruments complex or simple? Where does the challenge come from there? And that's a very interesting one, because obviously the piano isn't complex, it's just deep. The tenorium is very complex. Learning takes the form of learning the complexity of the instrument, but then it's not very deep, unfortunately. And when you look at something like a guitar, it's really just a string, 6 strings, a fretboard, resonating body, and that's it. It's obvious how to get a sound out of it. Nobody needs a manual. Nobody needs even a cheat card. Or there are no support forums for guitars. Of course, you have forums of experts discussing ways to play. But the funny thing here is that learning how to play the guitar is hard no matter what. There is no instant gratification in learning a guitar. If you take a guitar in your hand for the first time, you will suck. And that's a very interesting thing, because I think that in our society, this is an epic battle. Long-term goals versus instant gratification. You can have either one. You they cannot be really reconciliated. So if you want to lose weight, there's always a long-term goal and instant gratification. See, this is so hard that most people who want to lose weight just don't make it. Or if you know this one, well, I'm going to get stuff done today. No. That's so true, isn't it? See, this is the long-term goals where the instant gratification. Actually, this movie is about long-term goals, Frodo reaching Mordor, versus the instant gratification of the power the ring gives him. And this is brilliant. This is why the movie and the story in the first place is so brilliant, because it's about sticking to your true long-term goals, even if it fails in the end, if you know the story. So, and this is, where do the long-term goals come from? I want to be as good as Vladimir Horowitz or Glenn Gould playing piano. I want to play football like Lionel Messi, or maybe at last like Cristiano Ronaldo. I want to play this newfangled electronic instrument that just came out as good as who? What's the motivation of learning this newfangled electronic instrument? Where do I get the confidence that I want to learn that? That's a really hard question. My neighbor, who just also bought it, Steve Wozniak, who buys every gadget on the planet? Do I want to be as good as him? The nerd who built it, but doesn't know anything about music, and he plays it very virtuosely, but it's always sounding like Pokemon. Well, that's a hard one, and I don't think this can be solved easily. We need the motivation why people want to learn that instrument, want to keep learning it, and want to get really good. So to compensate for that, most electronic instruments that are produced for the masses, most interfaces that are novel, they play big on instant gratification. When you take the tenorion in your hand, you can make something really nice within 10 minutes. You cannot do that with a piano or a guitar. But this is effectively the opposite of what you want to do. You kill the drive to go on a long learning journey. What motivates me on such a tour de force? Why would I want to go there if I turn it on and I can make something nice immediately? So motivation, I don't know if you thought a little about or like listened to one of these TED Talks of the motivational researchers. We are not the behavioristic animals. Some theorists or engineers or designers see us. Gratification or threats can drive us. What really motivates is something very different. What really motivates us, and this is one of the German words I love because it says everything, it's the Selbstwirkungserfahrung, or the potential for Selbstwirkung. So it's very hard to translate. I found one translation as the effective experience or the experience of agency. So you feel that you can actually change something, do something special. And this is what drives us in most situations. Whenever we get more money, that's nice. This is what motivational research says. You can pay people as much money as they need so that money's off the table, and then give them freedom and let them have Selbstwirkungserfahrung, and they will do brilliant things. And when you take that away from them, you can give them as much money as you want, they will suck. So instant gratification makes for good Selbstwirkungserfahrung. That's the problem. Instant gratification makes a brilliant, effective experience for me all the time. But I don't want to go very much for a short amount of time. This is all the funny little electronic controllers people have at home in their drawer. They played them for 3 weeks or for a month, and then they use them never again. Whatever you do in technology that gives you instant gratification, whatever you do in a technology that gives you instant gratification will, by the technology, be understood as a valuable input. This is brilliant. This is what makes games so desirable and efficient. In stark contrast to reality, optimism, curiosity, and explorative approaches are almost always rewarded in games. This is an instant gratification that we don't get out of reality, so people flock towards games. The player experiences herself as an effective on and in his environment. To learn an instrument, on the other hand, an instrument like the piano or the guitar, or something that should be built here, is like a long bet. It needs endurance and patience and perseverance and even discipline. And instant gratification can erode that pretty well. So this is probably the last thing I want to say. Be careful about making it too easy, too approachable. So that's my collection. It should be very simple to understand, yet immensely hard to play, easy to transport, set up, and handle, rich feedback, satisfying feedback while playing, for everybody involved, allow creative misuse and something which obviously dropped off the note, and aesthetic to look at, hold, play, and watch being played. Only then, I think, can it have the depth that sends people on this long journey where they want to learn it. Oh yeah, thank you very much.